this comic book for? Oh, I never read this one. And then
Starting the meeting, not live on YouTube now.
All the
So.
same comic book.
Okay.
Then why would you collect the same one millions of times?
Hi, everyone. Welcome to ISD 191 Policy Committee meeting. I'm Leslie Chester, chair of the committee. So welcome everybody who may be chiming in. So we have quite a bit of policies we'll be reviewing tonight. One, as a way to get started, we'll be going over policies with changes. And so looks like first on our agenda is policy 506, which is student discipline. Is that you, Brian?
I'm sorry, could you repeat that one more time? Which one was it?
506, student
Yep.
discipline? Okay.
Absolutely. Yep, sorry about that. I was just pulling up my notes here. Thank you for the opportunity here. We do have a few small changes to policy 506 and one that maybe is a bit more substantive. The first change that we've got to recommend is on page 506-6. And that is to delete. Lisa, would it be easier if I share that one? Or do you think you'll be able to find it to project? Or Chair Chester, do you want me just to read through them if people have them in front of them? I just want to make sure we're able to see it if.
Yeah, we were hoping it was a way to pull it up because I'm trying to get it up on a second computer too, just so that I can see it as well.
Yep. I'll just pause here and then try to make sure we
Okay.
can get that up. I'm looking for where that is in the packet here.
So Brian, I don't have it in my packet, so maybe you do in yours.
I do. Yep. I need to make sure I'm sharing the right document here.
Oh, so this changed. I show 412 first.
Yeah, I know the agenda that was put out up on the screen is different from the agenda that I saw. So I didn't know, for public reasons, we should just stick with the one that we are broadcasting.
Am I sharing now?
Yes,
And what do you currently see? Do you see 506?
yes, 506-6. Yep.
Do you see anything else or just that?
Just that page. Yeah.
Ah, perfect. Nope. I just want to make sure that I wasn't sharing anything in my background because I didn't clean up my desk.
Oh, wait, I can see that too.
I do see your desktop.
Yeah, we can see your desktop. So you might want to expand
The
it.
window.
How's that?
Expand the window. There we go.
There you go.
Okay, good. All
Yeah.
right. Not that people can't stop and rewind, and I don't think there's anything there anyways, but appreciate it. So 506.6, if you'll notice, what we're suggesting is a strike through of item 31, which is criminal activity. Part of it is just the language sounds somewhat subjective, but we also believe that it is covered up here in item 19 that says a violation of local, state, or federal law as appropriate, which to us seems enough to cover what criminal activity may be of intent. And so just felt removing the language for redundancy, as well as it doesn't feel like it changes much about what we would do anyhow. And obviously then what you'll see, since we're offering to strike item 31, you'll see a whole lot of numbers that are changed because of the sequence, but that's simply because of the continued numbering system. It then becomes an addition to item 44. Now, this is one that I want to make sure I point out that we're recommending this language go into policy, and I'll explain why. We're also recommending it because it is going into some language that's in our handbook that is proposed. So I'm acknowledging here that there may be some out of sequence, and that the handbook is coming before the board this Thursday, and certainly the earliest this policy would come before the board is the following Thursday. And it is this item right here that would be out of that sequence or alignment. But we're talking about certainly the inappropriate use of electronic devices would be deemed as a behavior that would be inappropriate. And what we're really trying to get at here too is that recording of conduct or activities in the building. Even with our own security cameras, things that are captured during the school day, that's educational data, which is subject to privacy laws. And so having language in here that does acknowledge that when you're creating devices, you're gathering potentially educational data, which is not something we would permit. Now, you'll also see that it does not apply to public events. When people, for example, buy their ticket to come to a public event like a basketball game, there aren't the same kind of expectations of privacy as we would expect during the typical academic school day. So that does try to clarify what that means, so that a parent who may want to come to that basketball game and record their child on the court, that certainly isn't acceptable and something we would want to promote if families want to get some video of their loved ones participating in it. So that would become item 44. And then the next change here, this was just in review, and actually the omission of this language surprised me. Having worked in previous districts, it usually is customary that when a student is removed from class for behavior for a day, that's usually generally the choice of the teacher. But holding that student out for multiple days generally has an administrator involved to understand the why and make sure that we have appropriate plans for remediation, PBAS, getting back into the classroom. So it simply adds that additional step for the fact that we'd be asking that if a student was going to be gone for class for more than one day, the administrator would be approving it. That's not that dissimilar to the fact that a dismissal for a student leaving a classroom is up to a day, and anything beyond that is a suspension, which can only happen with an administrator, licensed administrator, to do those. There's also all one tiny little change right up here. You'll notice there was an extra period after handbook, so there is a change potentially recommended there as well. And I believe that is all the recommendations for changes for policy 506.
Do we have Darcy and Scott, do you have any thoughts, comments, edits, changes to or suggestions for this policy?
I do not.
Same.
Yeah, neither do I. I think the changes made sense, especially regarding the phone and electronic device uses in school. I think that was a good addition. So thank you, Brian.
Great, thank you.
Now I'd have to look at the agenda again to know what's the next one because we're out of sequence.
Director Chester, yes. Not sure why it's out of secret. So if you want to announce the next one you would like
So
to go to.
if I may.
Yep.
So I think now you should see a 191 agenda. Is that true?
Yes.
And I believe this matches the one you had previously.
Okay. So we'll follow this one now. Okay. So we started slightly out of order, but we'll return to order.
Yep.
So the next policy we'll be reviewing is policy 412, expense reimbursement for travel. And Lisa, feel free to
Sure.
start.
So 412 is all about our expense reimbursement internally for our employees as they travel. And so this is a policy that has some adjustments to it, primarily because we're looking at just changing our format where we previously were doing a per diem for each day that someone might be out of town. And instead we're trying to just revert back to a detailed receipts being submitted, and then we reimburse based on that. That seems to be far less confusing for people, and they can feel more comfortable with that. So that is what is recommended in this policy, along with the detailed receipts being requested. We are asking for travel to be placed, district travel that needs to be recorded on an airline, for example, that should be charged to the district purchase card, P card. And personal automobile travel is reimbursed at the standard mileage rate. So I'm sorry, the screen is a little high there. Personal automobile travel is under section 5B, and under 6 is where it then talks about the airline travel credit. Any credits or other benefits that might be issued with a purchase of airline then should be accrued to the district P card benefit rather than an employee. And that's essentially the only changes that are documented in the policy. Attached to this information is also the, I'm going to slide on down to it, the regulations So this is kind of our how-to that we provide to our staff. And so we just wanted to share this with the board members so that they could understand kind of what that looks like from a detailed perspective. It is not policy, it supports the policy.
Great, thank you, Lisa. Do we have, Darcy and Scott, do you have thoughts or edits, comments?
I do not.
I just had one clarifying question, and that's how do we define a detailed receipt versus a non-detailed receipt? Like, I know how we define it at my day job, but I don't know if it's defined the same way
So
by
what
our
we're looking
district.
what we're looking for is a detailed receipt would show, like when you go, for example, for a meal, there sometimes is the receipt that has the total. We're looking for the receipt that actually lists what it is that was ordered, so that it can be
That's what I
clear and
thought.
supportive of all of our policies, which does have some restrictions on what can be ordered.
Right. So kind of the itemized receipt is how we phrase it in my job, which is probably the
Oh,
same thing.
that's a good phrase that could be used if chose.
I just wonder if
Just go
people
back up
see
to
this,
there.
and I didn't, you kind of scroll through the other document, the supporting document pretty quickly, but is there
Do you want me
anything
to-
in there that specifies what the detailed receipt should include?
Let me see. I've got it
And
up
if
on a
not,
different
should there be?
screen.
Yeah. That was a big issue in my job when we started requiring that.
It just refers to a detailed receipt again. So I think that we could potentially, by using the term itemized, clarify that a little bit better.
That's fine with me. That was the only real question I had about that as I read through it. I just think it's helpful if it's as clear as possible if people are looking at the policy to know what is expected.
Sure.
That's it for me.
Great. Thank you, Lisa. You're on again for policy 703 annual audit. I should note there wasn't an attachment to review of policy with change on that.
I didn't see that either. I thought that one had already been taken care of, so I think we might have to come back to 703 if it
Okay.
isn't already one approved by the board. I think it might have just been
An edit.
on here.
Okay. All right. So we'll move along to 713 student activity accounting.
Yep, let me
And
slide on
that-
down.
Yep.
All right. So this is an MSBA change that is being made largely as a result of modifications that have been made to the accounting for student activity funds. We previously have always kept them in ISD 191 outside of board control. And that essentially just meant that we were reporting them in a separate report on an annual basis to the board, but it wasn't something that necessarily was recorded and tracked throughout our system and included in the UFARS report we made to the state. That has changed, effective in 1920 now, statewide. So therefore, as a result, the modification to the MSBA policy you will find is located on 713-3 at number 2. We used to have what was called a manual for activity fund accounting, a MAFA manual. And now, because it's under board control, it would just fall under our uniform financial accounting and reporting standards. So we have built new codes, revenues, and expenditures for all of those activity groups. And they are then using revenues and expenditure codes in our current UFAR system. With that, we have a breakdown of what is extracurricular, and this is giving some clarification of what is meant by extracurricular. So this is typically, everything's going to be recorded in the same manner for revenues and expenditures as we usually do our other accounts. And extracurriculars can tend to be activities and sports that are mostly the sports related activities that we have related to our various different groups. And so this clarifies simply the fact that that's recorded now under our normal accounting structure. It removes the language related to not under board control because that no longer is a distinction. Does some renumbering. All student activity accounts are needing to be in compliance with our board policies and procedures. That doesn't present too much of a concern for us. So some renumbering here under 4. And then as we move on down, number 5 does have some change here for the fact that when you have a graduated class, student activity accounts previously, you couldn't hold them for a non-existing group of students, right? So as the seniors graduate and leave, the next day they no longer are students. So therefore they can't have a carried forward account, right? So you needed to define where those dollars would go. So number 5 is basically clarifying that graduating classes, that when they terminate because they're now graduating, any residual money that is remaining in their account now remains in the general fund, and it may be used for any school district purpose. We are keeping track of all of our student activity accounts in a separate fund that crosswalks over to the general fund. So for UFAR's reporting purposes, final numbers, it's always in the general fund. But we keep track of it separate so that we know those are the funds for student activity. And then they do add here a fundraiser report. So now that these are under board control, that means all the fundraising that is done by these groups also needs to be included in a fundraiser report. You'll see that in future policy meetings, we will be bringing forward a proposed fundraiser or fundraising policy, as we do not currently have one. But as part of this does call for a report to be made available. The idea here is that it would be made available to the board in May and in November, and would basically list certain things that are needing to be reported: the activity itself, the type of fundraiser, the timing, the purpose, and the results of that fundraiser. We are in the process of establishing that internal protocol. It is not yet in place, but it will be.
Darcy,
And
and is there anything
that's it.
else?
Nope, those are
Okay.
the only changes.
Thank you, Lisa. Darcy and Scott, do you have thoughts or comments?
I do have a couple of questions. So under 5, B, this fundraiser report that you're just talking about, Lisa.
Oh, yep.
Does the note in this, like the second paragraph where it says note, does that refer to this existing process in the first paragraph?
It does. So,
Okay. Okay, so yeah, I wasn't sure if they were separate items, but if the note refers to the processes in place, that's great. That's the end of that question. So then above that, for oh geez, I don't okay.
keep going.
Yeah. So item 4. Okay, so Roman numeral 4, B4. So some of the new sections that you were just talking about.
Right here.
Yeah, E and yeah. So number
1,
yes,
2,
if
3.
you go down to no, keep going down. Number 4, item 4. Keep going down.
Right
Yeah,
here.
4. Yeah, all student activity funds collected and expended. That section.
Yep.
So item C. So collected and expended in a manner which does not produce a deficit or reasonably large accumulation of money. Does that mean in any given year or over time, and who's tracking that?
So this has been something that when they are student activity accounts standing by themselves, they had to make sure that they were not in the hole. So at the end of the year, clearly they couldn't be in the hole. They could not be negative.
Okay.
But throughout the year, sometimes their expense needed to be made before they would bring in the money to cover that cost, but they'd have a plan for it, right? So it's not much different for them. It's just a matter of that's how it does work. They do need to stay in the black.
Okay, and so theoretically, it's so who's in charge of that? Is it actually the advisor for the extracurricular? Is that
Right. The
is that it?
advisors
Okay.
are ultimately the ones that are working with the kids to make sure that that's the case. Because again, these are student activity accounts, which means they are student funds raised by them for their purposes. Okay.
Okay.
So as they are guided by advisors, the advisors help them to make sure that they're staying in the black. At the same
Okay.
time, at every site, there is somebody who's also helping to keep record of everything and make sure that the proper paperwork gets over to the finance office for payment and for deposit and receipts.
Okay, great. So then so this is just student activity funds for official groups. And so like I'm thinking, so like marching band, clearly an activity, that's clearly a student activity, has advisors, the whole thing. So what about the like the some
Booster club?
other well not was I'm thinking
Or-
like more loosely like organized groups. Like I see like there's like a hacky sack club or things like, does every single
Gaming
club or
club.
organization gaming, yeah. And gaming, yeah. So does every single like activity that I see advertised at the high school or even that would exist in the middle school, do they all have advisors? Or
They do not every single activity has a student activity account.
Okay.
And frankly, moving forward, I think this will be kind of a learning curve for everyone, but because this is now under board control,
Yep.
you're probably going to find that more and more the use of these become very limited to what they can otherwise do in the general fund. So the
Sure.
point is as they're doing fundraisers, it goes in here, they get it fundraised, and then they decide how they're
Yep.
going to use that money as a student group, right?
Yep.
But when you're talking about, say, music, for example, usually had a general fund budget, right? But
Okay.
then music also may have had a separate student activity group so that they could raise funds for a trip, say, overseas.
Okay.
And then you might have had a booster music as well, right?
Sure.
So now that this is coming under board control, I anticipate in the future down the road, we'll see things evolve where it's really just what's in the general fund, what's in the booster.
Okay.
It depends. If the students are adamant about wanting to raise funds for something particular that they want that isn't necessarily under general fund control, this is the avenue.
Okay.
So they'll always have that vehicle.
Perfect. That's helpful. And so it's we do define this area of what a curricular activity is, that it is run by an adult, things like that. And so that, that's good. That's clear. I guess it is, we might, I don't know if we want to add some language in here or some clarification that one, you can be a student group and not have to do this, that you don't have to have an activity account and have to have a, but if you want to raise money, charge any sort of fees for your activity or your, to go on a trip or do whatever, so like some kids get together, create a kickboxing club or whatever. They're just doing it loosely as a loose organization. They don't have to, this policy at that point doesn't apply to them because they're just a group of kids getting together, doing a thing, right? And so, but if they start asking their, friends, charging any sort of membership, or they want to, they want to do some fundraising to go to a kickboxing tournament and, St. Paul or whatever, then that's the point where this kicks in and they have to get an advisor and become an official club. And then they're under this control of this policy, right?
Right. Well, the advisors need to be approved through the sites. So as we have various different groups that want to get started, for example, the principal is going to make a recommendation as to whether or not that's an appropriate activity for a student activity group, and an assignment for an advisor can sometimes sometimes come with a stipend as well. So there may be costs involved
Sure.
from a district lens. Once
Yep.
that's determined, then there's a purpose form that must be completed by the group. The students organize that purpose or their group with a president and all of which, and they're supposed to then also take minutes. So this is intended to also teach them kind of the approach of how things can be governed. And so there's a broader purpose to the whole student activity accounting,
Yep.
concept. And so with that advisor in hand, then they can use that person as guidance, and that is intended to be an educational experience as well throughout the process. But it does allow for some flexibility. The fundraising piece is really kind of what's coming through to me as being the primary reason a student group is going to want to make sure that they continue under this, because otherwise many other needs can likely be met through our activities and athletics programs that we offer.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely true. This has a lot of, this is going to be great for teaching them red tape for sure. No, yeah. And so, but you don't have to, like, not every group is going to have an advisor. Like they can, like that group of kids want to just get together to, draw comics or whatever they're doing. They could be approved as a group at the high school and as a little club. They just aren't an official student activity organization without an advisor. And so, so I guess what I was thinking that is, if to eliminate confusion for student groups about whether or not this policy applies to them, that it is possible for a student group to exist at the high school, for example, and not be an official, not be an official group that has an advisor. We certainly have that policy in place and that process for sure. But it is possible to have student groups exist that don't have advisors. I think, because I think isn't like the comics drawing one, like not an official.
So I believe this policy is intended to step into place whenever there's funds involved that need to be tracked and monitored by that group.
Yep. And so absolutely true. And so I guess it's if I were a student looking at this, so I'm thinking about if I'm a student group, not sure if I have to. Okay, so I may be making more out of this than it's entirely possible, since I often do this, but thinking about, if I'm a student group, does this policy apply to me and funds and things like that? And so I'm not sure if I could tell for sure that this doesn't apply to me unless I have an advisor and an official student group or something.
I wonder if we're doing this out of sequence, because the next policy we're going to review is 510, which is school activities. I don't know if that would encompass some of those questions.
And
is that different?
And I don't, and you guys could certainly, double check me on this, but just thinking about it from a, my kid wants to create a group that's not going to be an official group. This policy looks like if they get referred here in any way, or they say, you have to have an advisor, you have to be tracking your funds down, there's a new thing, you have to be tracking all your funds and things like that. That doesn't actually apply if you're just a loose club of kids as opposed to an official student activity. So it might be just.
I think in my mind, the differentiation is whether or not they are raising funds. If they're not raising funds, well, this policy would not apply to them unless they start to raise funds.
Right. And so that's where I'm thinking, like somewhere in the general statement of policy or the definitions or the something, just being clear that that's the case. Like this doesn't apply unless you're an official student activity with an advisor, because that's really the two.
And are raising funds.
Yeah, have an interest in raising funds. So like if you're an activity group that has an interest in raising funds, this policy applies to you.
Right.
Yeah,
Because there may be groups, like I think you were saying, Darcy, that are official groups that have an advisor, but they don't raise any money, don't collect any money. And so I don't see that this policy would apply to them unless they decide to start raising money or charging a fee to join.
Yeah, and there's certainly some responsibility in the adult, advisor to know this policy exists and to be,
right,
to guide that. But just so kids don't get all. I don't want kids to not start an activity or a club
Mhm.
that of kids with similar interests, because they think they have to abide by this when it really
Yeah.
doesn't apply to them.
So
Okay.
in order for students to start an activity or club, maybe this is in this next policy too, do they have to have an advisor in order to operate on school ground, or can they just have a club on school premise?
So Director Chester, there are clear procedures for approving clubs, and I don't know if Brian Gersich wants to
Yeah.
share more, but it is that next policy too. But
Okay.
yes, there are steps they have to, and you'll see that in the student handbook.
Yeah,
Right.
two things you'll see forthcoming that'll actually address this, which actually aren't related to the funding of the policies, but the first one where there is some acknowledgement of this is equal access policy. So you'll see some things that are related to school clubs and how they can meet on school property. And then what you're also going to see, which is I think directly to this question about how students can start clubs, is coming up with some actually changed language based on our most recent review in our activities handbook, which I believe will be coming before the board. And the expectation is that it's coming before the board on the 27th. And that's where you'll see how it's outlined where students can play. So
Okay.
it's
Yeah.
connected in that way, but not because it doesn't answer the funding question that I think you're asking, but it does answer the question about how do they start a club?
Yeah,
Yes, they have to have a supervisor.
yeah. So it's so I just and I saw the materials, for the board meeting, and the policy come up here, and so I'm not trying to create more work, but I also don't want this policy, especially since it is much, we're putting we're putting much more clear responsibilities and restrictions on student activities and clubs. I just don't want kids to not do something because of this policy when it really doesn't apply to them. And so it might just be simple as, as Scott suggested, some language saying this policy applies to you if these three things are existence, and that might be enough. But trying to remove as many barriers as we can, and confusion about when this policy is comes into play and when it doesn't.
Does that give enough direction, Lisa, to add a little bit of language as to how how and when this policy becomes important to a student group?
So you're looking to modify the policy's purpose?
So
No, it'd be more like to define, like if there's like, like this for groups that have an interest in raising funds to support, their activities, this policy applies.
We could actually cross-reference text in the student activities book that I think it might clarify.
yeah, so just something.
Add.
Yeah. If we don't want
Yeah.
to add policy language, fine. But somehow I want to just make sure student groups know when to apply this and when not to. And go ahead and start your, I don't know, Game of Thrones club or whatever, and just have a group of kids get together, and you don't have to worry about this policy unless you're going to raise money. So just that kind of idea.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't think I had seen any other changes except for where Darcy was mentioning the debt. It also mentions under 4 in the same item under C, and an unreasonable large accumulation of money. I don't know if that needs to be, that's kind of vague. Like what does a large accumulation of money that's unreasonable mean?
Let's see, where was that?
4C.
Yeah, 4C.
4C?
Mhm.
Mhm.
I was wondering
Oh,
about
there
that
it is.
wording also.
Mhm. So it's not just a deficit, but it's like we just raised $1 million, kind of thing. Like,
And it's be relative to the budget too, if
Mhm.
it's, booster clubs, or some activity fees or activity groups could have, $1,000 to them is not an unusually large amount where it would be for the anime club or something.
yeah.
Right. So I believe that as these deposits come in, if there's not a reason for how they're going to get used, then the dialogue is going to be with the advisor as to what exactly was the money raised for, and what the plan is that the students have. And frankly, with the fundraising report that's now required, you're going to know that a little bit more upfront than what we've had in the past. So that will help it too as well.
Yeah, it's-
And then we're also cross-referencing the because I noticed that we called out under cross-reference to policy 511, which is student fundraising, which we haven't yet approved. But I didn't know if once we review that and come back, would we end up having to re-review this with this policy with any modifications?
I
because
think
of
that the requirements that are listed here under 713, they're going to match up with what we've got in 511 as I bring
Okay.
that forward.
Okay.
I didn't have any.
Yeah, I don't have anything else. Do we want to make that
Cross-reference is fine if that's, if that's going to be enough information for student groups to be able to make that determination.
okay.
That's fine with me.
Okay, so I heard cross-reference to the student activity manual and making sure that the 511 and the 713 align with regard to the fundraising requirements.
Yep.
It does tie to we were asked to bring this forward along with the 510, which is the next item on the agenda.
Yep. So we can move on to policy 510, which is school activities, which kind of furthers our discussion. And I think, Brian, you were bringing this one forward.
Well,
What
yeah, so as
changes?
a refresher, we brought this forward at a previous policy committee meeting. The only change that came through from MSBA, Lisa, if you've got it up, you can scroll to midway through the second page. There's a simple statement added that is exactly based on the reason this was requested by a board member to come back around and be paired with this was for the cross-reference. The new language of section E says to ensure that funds raised for extracurricular activities will be spent on extracurricular activities. That's to Lisa's statement from the previous policy that the kids are out raising the money. It should be going for the kids' activities as the ones who are raising the money. So this was already reviewed and sent forward, but asked to come back because of the fact that we wanted these cross-references, or the requester wanted the cross-reference with the 713 so they would come forward together. Which doesn't mean now that if you have other questions about the policy, you can't ask them, but that's why it's coming forward at this time.
So how is this supposed to happen? Just by virtue of the report that we'll get in May and November? Is that the process?
If I may.
Yeah.
The accounting for all those the student activity funds, that's when the policy will come into play, and the revenues would be deposited into the student activity accounts and the expenditures through there. So I think that as funds are raised by extracurricular activities, all of those will then move forward into that same process and be accounted for as a student activity aid fund. If a fundraiser is being run by the school, so let's say the high school is running a fundraiser, and it's not necessarily, it could be the okay, I'll use this example. I have a speech team that is organized through the school, and the school is deciding that they're going to run a fundraiser that's going to be for speech, and it's going to pay for their they want to be able to participate in more meets. That's one thing. That's not necessarily a fundraiser that the funds are then going for the student wants, right? It's more for what the program's looking for. On the other hand, if I'm doing a fundraiser and it's a car wash and I'm raising funds for purposes of raising money to be able to go on a music trip overseas, now that's for student use more so than it is for the music program itself, right? So that's where you might see a distinction as to which fundraiser is this for. Is it for the general fund, or is it for a student activity? And if it's for a student activity, it needs to be recorded as a student activity fundraiser. And that's why we're tracking it separately. We could have just melded these. We're not. We're keeping them separate, so that's very clear.
Any other comments or thoughts, Darcy or Scott, on this one? I think the only one that I have is that under cross references, we should cross reference 510.
So this is 510.
Or not
510.
510. I mean 511. I'm sorry.
Oh, Okay,
Getting my numbers mixed up, but yeah, the other one that's missing.
Just to cross-reference each other.
Yeah, cross-reference student activity fundraiser, fundraising.
the fundraising, yep.
Yep.
Which isn't yet approved, but will be. Yep, got it.
Yep. Mhm. Yeah, other than that, I didn't have any other changes either. So moving on, we have, oh, so I have to go back here.
The next
Where is
one is, sorry. you want me to-
It's 720, which
Yes,
is vending machines. Was that you, Lisa? Yep, it's you,
it's
Lisa.
me.
Okay.
This is coming forward not with anything I'm necessarily requesting, but more so through the MSBA review. And as they reviewed this, they have lowered the threshold. So I'm going to move on down to section 5 for contract approval. And so what they're saying is that if the estimated aggregate receipts from all vending machines located in any school facility, it used to be 50,000, but now if it's 10,000, then they want to make sure that we are abiding by the sealed bids and compliance. Now, we have other statute that requires that at a level of 175,000. They are significantly lowering this one because they want to make sure that when it comes to vending contracts, that this is something that is being monitored with the sealed bids and quotes requirements. So if we're a district, and previously back in the years when I was growing up in high school, the fact of the matter was there was some big money in there when you're talking about vending machines. I don't see that nowadays. So instead, I don't believe we're going to fall under or over this threshold at all for the revenues that we collect on commission for the vending machines that are in our buildings, accessible to the students. So therefore, if we estimated it might be over 10,000, we'd need to make sure that we're doing a sealed bid process. Otherwise, what we're doing is we're getting quotes from different companies and we're saying, here's the things we want in our vending machines. These are the times we want them available. This is how many machines we want across our buildings. Can you help us out? And we get their quotes and we get their comparison as to how much is it that they're charging for costs and how much is it that they're giving back to us in commission. And based on that, we're making a decision on the vendor. Oftentimes then this gets very detailed with regard to how that works. And a lot of it is referring to state statute. Again, it's all that bid law stuff. So you have another policy coming up tonight that's all talking about that too. So the fact of the matter is they're just really kind of, in my opinion, restating statute, which it's kind of what happens sometimes with the MSBA rewrites, but I don't know if it's necessary, but it is there. And with these significant changes that they have listed here, we just wanted to make sure that you had the opportunity that if you wanted to approve them with those changes that we could do so. The rest of this is like relettering. And then as we get down here to accounting, this part here, because we contract out, we just need to make sure that they are doing the daily, weekly, and periodic inventories because we don't empty those machines. They do that. So as they do, they just need to have this information available to us and provide us a reconciliation, which then tells us how much is our commission. So those are the changes made by MSBA in their review of this policy. And that's it for that one.
Scott or Darcy, do you have any additions or questions or thoughts?
Are the notes included in the policy or are they just for our purposes here?
So we leave them for your purposes. I guess I would look to remove the notes, but if you feel you want them in, we can leave them in.
Nope, there's just a typo to be made if they're going to stay in, but if they're coming out, then
You beat me to it. I was going to point that out also.
Okay, I'll pull the notes.
Yeah, and Lisa, the reason they made so much more money when we were kids is because they had junk food in them. That's why.
Because what?
Because they had junk food in them. We have
Yeah.
good things, healthy things.
And soda pop.
Yeah, if we want to make some
Yes.
money, we'd put some bad stuff
Sugar.
back in them. Yep.
I'll try.
I don't have anything else about this, Leslie.
Great, thank you. And then Lisa, you can stay on to go over 721 uniform grant guidance policy regarding federal revenue sources.
So so you know, this particular policy has a it has a nickname, which is valid. We call it the UG, the Uniform Grant Guidance, UG. It's been created as a result of the significant restrictions that they are placing around primarily federal funds and making sure that everything is being followed. So when we have, I want to purchase something out of just state funds, the 175,000 is my mark for a bid. However, when you're dealing with federal funds, then they want us to be taking a look at things very differently. So you can see here, there's a micro purchase amount of 10,000. So what's changed here is statute increased the thresholds to be 250,000 for simplified acquisition costs and 10,000 for micro purchases. It was 7,500. And so because of this change, you see this modification to this particular policy. Other than that, everything else you'll see is unchanged. I'm just scanning down so you can kind of view that. And we can go back up to anything you like. I'm just wanting to make sure that I'm not missing anything and that we're covering everything that is changed. This is a link to the EDGAR, which is the federal guidelines. Very interesting reading if you want to take a snooze. And there's a lot of, this is a very long, so that's the only change. So some would feel as though keep your policy where you don't have the dollar threshold in there and then you're not revising it all the time. Others feel like, nope, let's make that change. So it's kind of up to us. Oops, I went too far. And so with that, the question is, I'm just going to show you here. This was reviewed last on May 23rd of 2019. And so this has been reviewed again or revised by us in May 23rd, and it's been now coming forward simply because of this one modification of this dollar amount making a change. Because when they passed the law, they passed it so that it would have regular increments over time. And so now that that increment has come up, it's being adjusted. You'll note that the previous policy did not have a dollar amount. It instead just referenced. And so that's the wondering.
Okay. What do you guys think, Scott
I'd
and
be-
Darcy?
I'd be inclined to keep it as whatever the current law is, you know, and with the expectations that that we will be aware of what it is and abide by it, as opposed to putting the dollar amounts in the.
I agree.
Yeah,
I was going to suggest the same.
I agree too.
Okay.
Especially since those increases are already built into the federal, we would have to keep reviewing it every time they keep elevating it. So
Right.
mhm.
So for 721, I'm hearing that we would not change anything at this time. Thank you.
Sure, you have it memorized anyway. So.
Ugg and Edgar. We'll remember that. Ugg and Edgar.
And then we have other policies here. We have policy 105, equity, access, excellence, and education, along with policy 102, equal educational opportunity. Chair Alt had recommended that the policy review committee review these in tandem. Especially specifically under 4C, just to see if we wanted to add any cross-reference from one to the other. Does that sum that up well, Teresa?
Yes, just to add the cross-reference between the two policies, since you just passed this new policy 105.
Yep.
With the former 102.
Yep.
I have a question, Leslie, if you're ready. So on 105 4C,
I'm trying
Yeah.
to get there. There we go.
Lisa, I'm disappointed that you don't have these.
This it here?
Okay, so yeah, 4C, we list out educational equity and access to work to eliminate racial, ethnic, socioeconomic, different ability disparities. We don't talk about gender or gender, I guess gender related descriptions here.
Identities.
Gender identities, thank you. That's the word I was looking for. And
We
so I
should do
think
that.
I think that's an important piece. It's in not only this, but truly everywhere that we list out the any sort of equity and access groups, I guess is what these probably
Yeah,
are.
and orientation should be added in there too.
Yeah, so I'd like to see us, really make sure that and I know we've done it, over the past year or two, adding that language to policies like this, but I'd like to make sure that we are, wherever we are listing out this type of groups or identities, whatever we want to describe this, that we are adding gender orientations and identities in there as well.
So I think we could do a cross-reference to policy 413. And it's interesting with this policy, we don't mention gender above, but it is mentioned in the cultural adornments.
Yes.
Mhm.
Yep.
So
So we
I-
do. Yeah. So we do want to have that everywhere that we are,
Yep.
Yeah.
that we're listing.
So I think we'll do a cross-reference and bring that back. And then link the two policies also.
Yep, so we'll link in 102 and the policy you just mentioned for,
It may be on the bottom, scroll down. There may be some others, scroll down.
it has 104, 504, and
We did
601.
print 413.
Yeah, so we would
Yeah,
want
yeah,
And
okay.
is 105, is it?
So here you want a 102 listed as well?
Yep,
Yeah. And 413 is the one that gives more specificity. It adds more. Am I correct, Brian? Or Jamie, am I giving the right number?
Is 413 like harassment
Especially in
policy?
harassment, yeah. I think
Yeah,
that's where it's
Probably
listed.
pretty detailed in there, yes.
Okay.
yeah. Because in policy 102, just to cross-reference the cross-references,
Mhm.
we're cross-referencing 105, but it wasn't cross-referenced from 105 to 102. 402, which is disability and discrimination, 413, harassment and violence, 422, policies incorporated by
Yep.
reference, 521, student disability non-discrimination, and 522, student sex non-discrimination. So do we want to make sure those cross references go
Yep.
back into policy 105?
Yes. Yep, they're all equally valid as cross-references.
Yep.
Okay. And then Director Chester, did we skip 506?
No, we did that first.
Up front.
Oh, that's right. And then 703, the annual audit, we passed that in April.
Yeah,
Yeah,
I
I
thought
think
so.
that might have been an agenda typo.
Okay,
Which is okay.
all right.
I don't have anything else, Leslie, about those.
Okay, anything from you, Scott?
Not at this time.
Okay, so moving along, MSBA came out, I believe, yesterday with the model face covering policy for districts to review and adopt. And so I wanted to make sure it was timely to be added onto our agenda tonight to see if how or when if we are okay with this, or if there's a lot of changes we would want to continue to review or not. But if there was any movement we were ready to make, we would want to make sure it got onto a board agenda for first reading pretty quick because of just the timing of everything. So here, I don't know if everybody's had a chance to read this policy, or if there's because it's brand new. So if there's any thoughts, questions,
I have some more information to share.
Okay,
So actually, the governor's mandate for face covering is considered law. So we don't need to pass a face covering. And so we did contact Terry Morrow from MSBA to get clarification. So Jamie, did you want to share that information, or would you like me to pull it up? It was just for our consideration.
Yeah, I don't have it with me right now.
Yep, I
So
got
if you
it.
don't mind pulling it up.
So the governor's executive order is considered law. So any policy that we have would not supersede. So it would be if we felt we wanted to make a statement. And then also remember, I did mandate face coverings for employees and visitors before the governor, because we have an existing policy that allows me, the superintendent, to look at the health and safety. So actually, for me to require for students, we already have a policy that would cover that.
do we need to take any of the, I'm just thinking if we choose to pause on this policy, is there any language within here that we would be using to provide as a guide to educate families about the expectations regarding the face coverings?
But I'd actually pulled neck gaiter. The Washington Post came out with a story today about neck gaiters being
Saw that.
almost worse than not wearing anything. So you may want to pull neck gaiter from the list of options.
Yeah, and so that's very interesting. Brian and I have been, today we were at the MDE Back to Better conference. It's our annual fall conference, and the keynote was Susan Klamer from the epidemiologist. So it changes rapidly.
Yep.
And so she was giving us the latest. And so we really have to work with our nurses, and they are having regional support. We have county support. So that would be another reason not to have a policy concerning this, because
Okay.
we do have that other policy that gives us the option for health and safety. We can have some mandates.
Yeah, I agree. I think it's, and, scarves may or may not be, effective enough, bandanas, things like that. If we don't need this policy, I'd prefer not to use it and just use it as the question. This may come back into play if the governor rescinds the order and we still think it's helpful for people to wear in school if we go to a hybrid model, as things calm down and we're in some sort of hybrid or full school model, so. But we can keep that, I guess, on the back burner. We may know more than we do now about what those standards are.
I'm okay with not moving forward with a separate policy right now, as long as Teresa, you and Brian feel that you and the other staff have the resources and the ability to enforce it. Because I've seen some news reports from other parts of the country where that's been the rationale that school districts or principals have used in not enforcing a mask mandate in their school, is we can't enforce a mask mandate. And so I just want to make sure that you all have the support you need, the resources you need to be able to enforce that in our schools, if we're even in the buildings this fall.
Right.
So thank you for that. So I actually have two routes. So we could go with this policy, but I think because we have existing policies, maybe I want for this case to just use that. That we are requiring face coverings for students, and their exceptions do apply that are embedded in the governor's stipulation. So
Yep.
they're very clear.
And that's already in place, so we wouldn't need to go through the process of creating adopting a new policy.
I could share that with families, and Brian, I think we would have to add it to the handbooks.
Yeah.
So let us think about that. But if the board wants to go through a full policy, that's your choice.
I'm more concerned about making sure that the ability to enforce the mandate is there than whether or not it's a separate policy. So
Yeah.
Right.
I agree, because I mean, I've been in stores where masks are required, but there's nobody in the store that's enforcing the requirement.
Yes, we've all been in those stores, unfortunately.
And so our nurses and occupational therapists really want to take the lead of educating and working with families. There are varied reasons why people may not be able to wear the mask, as the governor had it too. And then also sometimes it's a matter of fit. As many of us will know, it's our faces are different.
Oh,
Sure.
yeah, no, completely.
You
I
do with
mean, I
children,
think
yeah.
it's an
Mhm.
and, like enforcing it for people who are maybe choosing not to comply versus having the
Right.
exceptions, because we know there are people who don't fit or have the ability to wear a mask, and so we want to be able to enforce while protecting those that need that protection to be exempt from it.
And Brian can share more, as we shared at the last board meeting, that it's part of our expectations for any behavioral expectations. So using our PBIS. And so Brian, did you want to add a few comments?
No, I appreciate the conversation. I was just going to mention that I do think we have the ability to enforce this. First, it is a mandate by the governor. I think his ability to look at data and information on the fly, and if they decide neck gaiters are going to be pulled off as a allowable face covering, they can change that faster than we might be able to change policy in that regard. And I also think policy 506, we just reviewed that a little bit ago, which gives that big list of things that we can enforce as a district. One of them are state, local, or federal requirements, which, as Dr. Battle had just mentioned, this has the force of law. So I think within that, and obviously, as we talked about at the last board meeting, our goal is to treat this like a behavior and use our PBIS systems to do that. But if necessary, I think we absolutely have policy in place that we can enforce what we need to. And the support of MDE, which has come out on a number of occasions to suggest all of the range of things that we can do with students who either are unable or unwilling to wear the face coverings as required. So I do absolutely think policy is in place for right now. To the point of Darcy earlier, if the mandate from the state is changed and we decide locally we still want to have it, that's when we may have to look at the policy to give us a little more specificity to what we're looking for.
And then just real quick, so the policy you might be referencing is the one that was that was noted on the agenda for reference. Is that the 807 health and safety policy that would encompass some of this?
Are you asking me on that one?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yep. Teresa asked, Teresa wanted to include a link to that policy and it wasn't letting me link it. So I just put the policy in for a reference.
So this would be the catch policy for the face mask.
So I
coverings
do think
outside of.
He
in
also
this
said the
policy, I
student
have the
discipline
authority.
policy.
Yep, 807. Within this policy, I do have the authority
Okay.
to comply as the governor specifies.
Yeah.
Okay.
Scott, you're mentioning something?
I just was saying, I thought Brian had also mentioned the, was it
Jamie, stop
506?
there, because it
the one
actually
that could
mentions
be
pandemics.
enforcing the mask mandate.
Okay.
Scott,
Yeah,
you were breaking up. I didn't really hear your question.
No,
Did
I
you
think he was
hear it,
also just
Brian?
yeah, I think he was just asking about where the reference was, maybe in 506. And if you go to 506-5, there's that whole list of unacceptable behaviors, and item 19 is violation of any local, state, or federal law as appropriate. And I do think that
Right.
we
Thank
have
you.
this all over the place where I think we can enforce that.
That's
And
what I
Jamie-
wanted to hear. Thank you.
And Jamie, if you scroll down, no, scroll up, excuse me. Back up to where they have the numbers, stop there. Keep going. Up to number 1. Yeah, oh, the PPE. There's actually a reference to PPE we discovered in this policy. Did you see that? Personal protective equipment. So, okay.
Okay, so for now, we're confident that we can proceed without a mask policy, but we'll be coming back to it if anything changes in the governor's mandate. And we feel the need based off of what we're seeing within our district to change that, right?
That worked for me.
Okay. Great. I don't think we have anything else on our agenda. Do we have, Jamie, do you have everything you need for moving forward with things to go to the consent and action items in the next upcoming agendas?
Can we just go through them really quick?
Yep.
And then just to make sure.
Yep.
So 412.
412. Because now if we, so Darcy, because I'm still understanding the committee a little bit here too, and what goes into consent versus what goes into
No substantive
Or-
changes is consent.
so all of these would be going back for first read, or is first read kind of like new policy?
No, first read is substantive changes and new policies.
Okay,
Is that
so
right, Jamie?
Yep. So I guess there's some that you wanted changes made to. Was the expectation to have them come to the next board meeting on the 27th of August?
I don't really think, so Leslie, up to you, or in Scott, what you think, but anything that we're just adding cross references to, I mean, there's changes in everything, except like the last one, Lisa, you brought where we said, don't add the MSBA stuff to it. Was that the UG one? That, since we're not making that change, we're keeping it as is, then that can go to consent agenda.
yeah,
And anything we're just adding like cross references to, I don't know if that constitutes a substantive change, because we're just saying,
making a
we're not changing the language of the policy. So anytime
Yeah, I
we're
think-
substantively changing the language of the policy, then that's a consent, that's a first reading.
yeah. So like 105 and 102, because we'd be adding just the cross references to those two policies to one another, and the additional ones to 105 that were noted in 102. I think that's just cross reference. That wasn't changing any language. So I
Correct.
do think that could go to consent as well. I would say the changes within student discipline, I get confused between vending machines and UG. So vending machines, the activities and accounting, and 412 all had some pretty substantive changes that I think would have to go to vote for first read.
I agree.
All right. So with the minor changes that you're requesting, they can all go forward. Nothing needs to come back except for the COVID-19 face covering policy, if you guys choose to review that again.
Yeah, I would say, is that right?
That's my understanding.
Yep.
All right.
Great. Well, if there's no other current business, I think we are adjourned tonight. So we'll thank everybody who joined us online, and thank you, Lisa and Dr. Battle and Jamie and Brian and Darcy and Scott for the committee work that we're doing, and we'll see everybody on Thursday.
Yes, go enjoy the lovely evening.
Bye-bye.
Thanks.